Now, back to Bowl Game Radio with Bruce Binkowski and Mark Neville on San Diego's sports leader, the mighty 1090.
And welcome back, everybody, to Bowl Game Radio. I'm Mark Neville with Bruce Binkowski. And a reminder that Bowl Game Radio is brought to you in part by National University. Accommodate your busy schedule, your life, your university. National University. And San Diego County Credit Union. It's not big bank banking, it's better.
And this Saturday, we'll have our official viewing party at the Tilted Kilt in Mission Valley from 4 until 6. Mark Neville will be there. I'll be there. A lot of our bowl volunteers will be in attendance, and you're invited. The Tilted Kilt is the official college football viewing partner of both the Holiday Bowl, the National University Holiday Bowl, and the San Diego County Credit Union Poinsettia Bowl. You can stop by every Saturday during the football season to check out all of the college football action. The Tilted Kilt experience is one of a kind and will always leave you in a better mood than when you arrived.
And Bruce, now in this segment, we're going to talk a little Pac-12 football, and very pleased to have joining us ESPN.com's Kevin Gemmel. Kevin, welcome to the show. You're on with Bruce and Mark.
How you doing, guys? Good to talk to you again.
Hey, Kevin, how you doing? Well, here we go. You're our Pac-12 expert, and you're going to tell us, as we talked about recently, who will represent the Pac-12 in the National University Holiday Bowl. Right off the bat, do you have a personal favorite of who you think may land in San Diego, or is it still too difficult to call?
You know, when you look at some of the games that are coming up this weekend, next weekend, just the pecking order, it's so up in the air right now. You know, I heard you guys before talking about anyone from Stanford to Arizona State to UCLA to, USC to Washington. Who knows? You know, there's just so much football left to be played, and that's why November is so much fun, especially when you've got a conference like the Pac-12 that plays a 9-game conference schedule. They can't schedule FCS teams in November. It's just a grind, and every game is so important. And I heard you guys talking about that earlier, by the way, the difference between college basketball. I would venture a guess, though, that if you went over down to Steve Fisher and asked him how important tomorrow night's game against Arizona is, he'd say it's pretty important.
Agree with you on that. But in general, like if you have Duke and North Carolina, it's a huge game, obviously. But
I hear you.
Just got we're supporting our bowl games here.
Absolutely.
Whose side are you on anyway, Kevin? But I do want to put you on the spot here, Kevin. Who rank your top 5 teams? Granted, we have a lot of football to be played for the rest of the regular season, but who are your top 5 in the Pac-12 right now?
Well, right now you got to start with Stanford, obviously, just because of how they've seized control of the Pac-12 North. They still have to get by USC. They still have to get by Cal, but they seem like they put themselves in a really good position to get to the Pac-12 title game for the second straight year. And then if you're just kind of looking for power rankings, still Oregon. I mean, Oregon is still one of the top 5 or 6 teams in the country. You can't argue that. And then it gets real questionable, whether it's Arizona State or whether it's UCLA. Both those teams have really tough games this weekend before they have that showdown next week in Pasadena, which is going to be a phenomenal game. And then after that, Washington, USC. You've got this upper tier of Stanford and Oregon, and then there's a slight drop-off after that, and it's really a mix of 4 or 5 teams that could fit in there.
You mentioned USC, and they're having an amazing year, just a weird year, really. And when Lane Kiffin got fired, I want to see if you can take us inside their locker room a little bit in the Trojan locker room. What is going on? I mean, how are they playing so well now? Well,
Ed Orgeron has just made it fun. He took all the pressure off of them. They're 4-1 since he's been named interim head coach. You look at the numbers, they're running the football better. They're more efficient on first down, which is making easier third downs. He's made it loose and relaxed, and there's not that pressure of being a USC football player. And it always seemed like Lane Kiffin held them to a very high standard, which he should. USC football is still a brand, but I think that weight was just weighing down on those guys. And Ed Orgeron comes in and he says, first thing I'm going to do is I'm bringing back cookies. And then they win a game and he buys them burgers and milkshakes. He's just taking some of the pressure off. Yeah. And they're having fun. I talked to a couple of those guys last week, and they're just enjoying football right now, which is something that doesn't seem like USC had been doing for the last year and a half.
You know what, Bruce? He just talked about how burgers and cookies did it. As the executive director of the bowl games. I think your staff would work much harder if you brought in burgers and cookies.
You know, I'll take that under consideration.
The media would appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll bet they would. You're listening to Bowl Game Radio, and we're talking with Kevin Gemmel from ESPN.com. He's the Pac-12 reporter for ESPN.com. You know, Kevin, we were talking about if Northern Illinois loses tonight, they would be out of the BCS mix, and if Boise State were to play Fresno State in the championship game, which is possible, and if Boise State knocked them out, Fresno State would be out of the BCS mix. So if that were to happen, so a Fresno or a Northern Illinois opens up a spot, can you see the situation where a Stanford with 2 losses or an Oregon with 2 losses would pretty much automatically be in the BCS, so the Pac-12 would have 2 teams up rather than 1?
Yeah, I think that's a real strong possibility because the winner of the Rose Bowl is going to go to the Rose Bowl, or the winner of the Pac-12 championship game is going to go to the Rose Bowl no matter what, whether that's Stanford, Oregon, ASU, or UCLA, or USC is still in that hunt. Mm-hmm. And then you're looking at a 2-loss Stanford or a 2-loss Oregon. Both will still be ranked in the top 14. I can't imagine Oregon, by the way, losing out the rest of the year when you look at their schedule. I just don't see that happening. And really, same for Stanford. It's going to be tough in the Pac-12 title game, whether they get ASU or UCLA, 2 teams they've beaten this year, but it's hard to beat the same team twice in the same season. So I think it's real conceivable that no matter what, a 1 or a 2-loss Oregon team is going to get to the BCS as an at-large, whether that's the Fiesta Bowl, and then the winner of the championship game will go on to the Rose Bowl. So
regardless if Fresno State, for example, made it to the BCS, you think even then the Pac-12 most likely will have 2 teams go up?
I think so. The Pac-12 is widely regarded as, the second strongest conference behind the SEC, and I think it's an attractive conference, as you know. You guys have a bowl game tied in with them. People want to see Pac-12 football. It's exciting. It's fun. The teams travel well, which is always good for bowl games. So, I think more than likely we're headed for another year with 2 Pac-12 teams in the BCS. We've
been associated with the Pac-12. The National University Holiday Bowl has been associated with the Pac-12 since 1998, and I can't recall any year that they did not bring, when I say they, teams from the Pac-12 didn't bring 10, 11, 12, 15,000 fans to San Diego. So, yeah, you're right. They're a great anchor conference for us. And hopefully the matchup this year out of the Big 12 will bring a lot of people. We'll have a great bowl game in San Diego on December the 30th.
Absolutely, and hopefully if it is UCLA, they'll have a better showing than last year.
Well, yeah, they didn't really show up last year. It was a tough night for UCLA.
I've talked to their offensive coordinator, Noel Mazzoni, a lot about that particular night. They lost a few offensive linemen along the way, and the quarterback just got rattled. Brett Hundley, that was his first time in a bowl game. And, I talked with Noel about it, and he said, it's like when you bring the kids to the movies, you want them to behave, but sometimes they're just throwing popcorn and spilling soda on the floor, and that's kind of what happened to us.
But take nothing away from Baylor because they played outstanding that night.
Absolutely not.
So, Kevin, it is possible, just looking ahead at the end of the regular season and the end of the conference championship games, Alabama, Florida State, Ohio State, Baylor could all be undefeated. Do you see any way that Baylor, because I think of those of Florida State, Ohio State, I think they have the toughest schedule. Do you think there's any way they can sneak up into the national championship game?
I don't think so. Keep in mind they're still behind Stanford in the BCS ranking. Mm-hmm. Stanford still has a top 25 game to play. Baylor still has some tough games ahead of them. I don't think Baylor's schedule to date hasn't really been phenomenal. It hasn't been bad, but it hasn't been as phenomenal as like a Stanford.
It seems like in the Big 12, the top teams have all waited to play each other until now.
Yeah. So, we still need to see how that's going to play out. But, they still need to jump Stanford. They still need to jump an undefeated Ohio State team that hasn't lost in 2 years. It's going to be real tough to sway voters in that regard. And then, Florida State's caught fire and Alabama's Alabama. So I think, those teams are on the outside looking in unless we have a scenario where 2 or 3 teams lose. And even then, they still have to make a case for being better than Stanford, which is really hard to do right now.
So much of what we do in our business and in your business is trying to guess what might happen, and that's what we've been doing for the last hour here. But if you look at it, since we're focused on Stanford and Oregon supposedly going up to the BCS, Stanford has SC, Cal, and Notre Dame. My guess would be their toughest game of that schedule is SC. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's a fair statement. And when you look at the recent history between Stanford and USC. Stanford has won 4 in a row. They've won 5 of the last 6. David Shaw knows how to game plan for that team. However, the stipulation is the last 3 games, and I think 4 of the last 6 have been decided by a touchdown or less. That's just a brand that Stanford plays. They're going to be in a lot of white-knuckle games. That's just who they are. And when you're in those kinds of games, you need to rely on the maturity of your team to make sure that when it gets tight in the fourth quarter, they are able to handle that. They're now 11-3 over the last 2 years in games decided by a touchdown or less. But when you play in those kinds of games, anything can happen. I mean, you look at last year, USC converts a 4th down, maybe it's a different ball game. The triple overtime game at the Coliseum in 2011, if Curtis McNeil doesn't fumble, who knows what's going to happen. The year before that, if Nate Whitaker misses that field goal, it's a different game. So there's been some really, really tight games. Now, Stanford only has 2 conference games left. They can wrap it up with USC and Cal, but that Notre Dame game, Pitt didn't do Stanford any favors by beating Notre Dame because that took them out of the BCS rankings, and I'm sure Stanford would have loved to have another victory over a top 25 team on its resume. But that Notre Dame game is still going to carry some weight with voters. And
assuming Stanford wins out, they finish 11-1. Oregon has Utah, Arizona, and Oregon State. Again, assuming they win out, you're going to have 2 11-1 teams out of the Pac-12 before the championship game.
Yeah, and that's the product of the system that we're in with the BCS. If we're in a playoff year, then I think we're looking at a 14 playoff of Alabama, Florida State, Ohio State, and then probably Stanford. If we had 6 teams, Oregon would be in there, right in that mix. So, it's baby steps into the playoff system, and then we'll see how it goes from there.
We're starting to run a little bit late here, Kevin, but your picks in a couple games. First on Friday, we got Washington at UCLA. Who do you think is going to take that one?
It's a tough one, but I like the Bruins at home. I think they're playing really confident football right now. Winning in Arizona for the first time since 2003 last year was a huge boost for them. It's a young offensive line, but they're coming together.
And one more, Oregon State and Arizona State.
Boy, that's another one. Arizona State is so tough at home. You look at what they've done, to Washington and to USC when they're playing in Tempe, and they are just really, really tough. Oregon State, the offense was phenomenal the first half of the season. It struggled the last couple of games. I like the Sun Devils.
Well, Kevin Gemmel, again, thank you very much for joining us here on Bowl Game Radio.
Absolutely, guys. Good to catch up with you.
Okay, Kevin Gemmel from ESPN.com covering the Pac-12. I'm Bruce Binkowski. That's Mark Neville, and you've been listening to Bowl Game Radio. Mark?
And also remember to join us next week. We have a great show. Ted Toner, of course, will be back with his team selection update, but then we'll be joined by the executive director of the BCS and the College Football Playoff, Bill Hancock. So join us then. You've been listening to Bowl Game Radio on the San Diego Bowl Game Media Network and the mighty 1090.